Hello BookTube and welcome to the first weekly reads of 2021. So the last reading week of 2020 was disappointing. All of the books I read were ebooks, so I'm going to be holding up Lot by Bryan Washington as a prop for most of this discussion, particularly of the books I read over the last days of 2020, because the first book I read this past week, I started it last Friday and finished it on Saturday, was Memorial, the first novel by Bryan Washington. Memorial is the story of an interracial gay couple, Vinson, who is African American, and Mike, who is Japanese American, whose immigrant parents have separately moved back to Japan. His father to Osaka, his mother to Tokyo. Vinson and Mike's relationship is tumultuous, abusive. There's definitely hints of abuse in the relationship, of violence. It is heading towards a spectacular breakup when Mike informs Vinson that his mother is flying in from Tokyo for an extended stay, and he is, a few days later, going to be flying to Osaka to spend time with his terminally ill father, leaving Vinson to figure out how he's going to navigate, get on with Mike's mother. The first part of the novel, told from Vinson's point of view, is about Vinson really coming to terms with having this strange woman in the house he's shared with his partner for 4 years, and eventually coming to an agreement, an understanding, even a friendship. Meanwhile, Vinson begins to feel an attraction for the older brother of one of the children who attend the daycare he works at. The older brother is in his mid-late 20s. He's I think some kind of chiropractor or physical therapist. Meanwhile, in Osaka, Mike reconnects with his father, begins to work at his bar, which is populated by a cast of characters, which can only populate those kinds of mini Japanese bars, or probably most bars worldwide. And really comes into his own, and himself begins a flirtation and a relationship with a Singaporean photographer named Tan, while also having flirtations with the son of the distributor who works with his father, and Kurihiko, who is the bar mascot. Eventually, Aiju, Mike's father, dies, and part 3, which is a return to Vinson's point of view, wraps up the two storylines and drops some revelations and settles the tumultuous relationship of Mike and Vinson in a ambiguously hopeful way. I thought the novel was okay. It wasn't spectacular. It didn't really wow me. It was okay. I thought Vinson's chapters were, despite the loving detail, as Brian of Bookish pointed out in his review of Houston. Bryan Washington is from Houston and knows the city. I don't know. Vinson just seems. I don't know. It's just something about his character that I'm not sure. I thought, even though Osaka doesn't get quite the Houston treatment, and Mike's chapters are chapter section is markedly different than Vinson's. I think the novel really comes into its own, like, towards the end of Mike's section. That's where it's okay, kind of got a little bit better, but it quickly went back to okay once Vinson took the narrative back over. I do have some criticisms of the book. Every conversation is tinged with the possibility of violence, of some conflict. And it kind of grated. I also thought some of the world building, even though, yes, this is a realistic novel, so there's not a whole lot of world building that needs to be done. Although, except for maybe the concrete sort of presentation of Houston and, to an extent, Osaka as well. But the sort of the family details. There's a paragraph where Lydia, Vinson's sister, is sort of presented as younger, and then she's presented in the same chapter as, paragraph as older, although that could have been a character's assumptions. But I also found some of Vinson's family history, which is tumultuous and abusive. Both Vinson and Mike come out of abusive households. The fathers both are alcoholics and abusive to their wives, although Vinson's father's the only one who's really emotionally abusive to his children. But there's a stream in the later Vinson chapters in which it's revealed that some of Vinson's resentment towards his parents lies in the fact that when he became he was diagnosed with HIV, that he was disowned. But at the same time, he still lived with his father. When he moved in with Mike, he was living with his father. His father caught him in bed with another man. And so I'm not entirely sure about that line of that particular sort of subplot, that particular trauma. Although, both parents do display, homophobia, tinged with, love for their children and acceptance of their children. They're okay that their sons are gay, but they also use homophobic slurs. There's a lingering homophobia to their relationships. And in Vinson's case, there's this weird scene that I spoke of last week when Vinson's mother and Lydia come to visit him, and they find him living with an older Japanese woman, and there's this weird scene of whether he's gone straight or something, and I don't know. It rubbed me the wrong way. Although I think it's not necessarily that hope, because obviously there would be on the part of his mother, who I think is the more homophobic of the two. But that she wouldn't recognize that, oh, this is Mike's mother. Or assuming this would be Mike's mother or something. But anyway, and there's, towards the end, there's a running subplot of Vinson's family sort of working through its own problems that I don't necessarily think works all that well. It tries to wrap itself up in a nice little bow, although, Vinson kind of torpedoes it. So, anyway. But in the end, the novel's okay. There were parts of it I really enjoyed. I do think the ending is nicely ambiguous. It does wrap up fairly well. Maybe a little too neatly, and you have to question, why exactly are these two men together in the first place? It don't quite work. Anyway, so that was Memorial by Bryan Washington. I think I'm just going to keep on holding this. Nah. Okay, put that down for a bit. So after Memorial, I moved on to the Book of Eels by Patrik Svensson. Excuse me. Again, this was an ebook I checked out from my library, and it's a mix of nature writing, history, and memoir. So, it's about eels, and there's some science of eels, some of the history, some of the biology of eels. There's some literary criticism, eels and culture and literature. There's a weird chapter about Sigmund Freud trying to find the testicles of eels. That may or may not have been the cause of some of the weirder aspects of psychoanalysis. And there's the relationship of Patrik Svensson and his father through eel fishing. And as I read it, it was okay. As is a continual refrain that I have with these types of this type of nature writing, as I was reading it, I'm screaming, where are the eels? I want more eels, less Patrik Svensson, more eels. But the more I think about it, the more this book probably actually should have been more memoir, with the eels playing a more subdued role. Basically, bits of eels here and there, like the biology, the history, the cultural interpretation. But yeah, because I mean, the most consistent part of the story is the memoir of Patrik and his father going fishing for eels. And of course, I think part of that is that Svensson is not a scientist. He isn't even a science journalist. He's a journalist, but his remit is culture, which is why the best parts of the Book of Eels, when the book is actually talking about the eels, is the discovery of the eels' breeding grounds by Johann Schmidt. That was a lovely chapter. And the sort of the literary criticism chapter of eels in culture and in literature, particularly Vinson's analysis of eels in Günter Grass's The Tin Drum. And I mean, there's also when Svensson analyzes the work of Rachel Carson, and also I quite liked some of the chapter dealing with the current state of eels. The European eel, Anguilla anguilla, is critically endangered, and there's a passage about the various mass extinctions that have happened on Earth, and the sort of the sixth mass extinction, and how this one is so different. That one actually made me tear up, and is probably the most moving passage in the book, alongside the conclusion of the memoir section. So, again, I thought the book was okay. In a way, I wish there had been more eels, and I wish it had been more of a memoir. So anyway, so I managed to read the Book of Eels all in one day. So on Monday, I was thinking of reading Fathom by Rebecca Giggs. This is a book about whales, although I was worried. I had watched Olive's top 10 nonfiction books of 2020, and her description of Fathom sort of made me worried because it seems to be more this sort of, it's about whales, but it's about other things as well. And so that had me worried. And then when I started reading it on Monday, the opening passage just, I don't know. And then I noticed it was 500 pages, although I'm pretty sure there's going to be a ton of notes at the end. I'm like, oh, I'm not going to be able to finish this by Thursday because I didn't want any carryover. So I put the book down. I'm pretty sure I'm going to pick it back up at some point, though. Anyway, so then I went browsing on the library, the ebook part of my library, and I picked up a few books. I'd initially thought of reading the best poetry of 2020, and then I read some of them, and no, no, they were terrible. So then I decided there were about 5 books I checked out that I was going to go with, and I decided to read Small Days and Nights by Tishani Doshi. I don't know what exactly brought the book to my attention. I love the cover. The cover design is amazing. But But I also read Steve Donahue's best novels of 2020. That Small Days and Nights, one of the upper novels. I think it was like 7 or 8. So I'm like, I'll give this a try. It's about a Italo-Indian woman, Grace Marisola, who has immigrated to the United States, and she's in a unsatisfying marriage to an American when she returns to India for her mother's funeral, where she learns that she has inherited a good-sized property, 10 acres, and a house somewhere around Madras, and that she also has an older sister who has been institutionalized for almost all of her life with Down syndrome. And so Grace basically begins to take care of her older sister, and life happens. I bailed about 60 pages in. I read the first part, and the novel really didn't do anything for me. I thought the language was uninspired, a bit pedestrian, and I didn't particularly care for the characterizations of a lot of the characters. So I decided to bail on Wednesday, which, sort of completely discombobulated everything. So I basically, with bailing on Small Days and Nights, I called 2020's reading quits. And so, that ends 2020 on a rather disappointing note. And unfortunately, 2021 today starts no better, because I have 2 bails. Anyway, so alongside Small Days and Nights by Tishani Doshi, I also checked out Boyfriend Material by Alexis Hall, which was, I think, number 5 in Steve's romance list. Conventionally Yours by Annabeth Arnold, which I think he really gave a positive opinion of not too long ago. The Prettiest Star by Carter Sickels, and American Pop by Snowden, Wright, which was highly ranked in Steve Donahue's 2019 debut fiction list. So I decided to start on Alexis Hall's Boyfriend Material. It's about Luke O'Donnell, who is the son of a famous, infamous, aging rocker, and I'm blanking on the boyfriend's name. And so Luke, basically, there were compromising photos taken of him, and in order to save his job, he enters into a fake relationship with a lawyer who's sort of more stodgy, more solid. Basically, it's like a fake relationship between opposites, which they both need each other, I guess. I didn't make it too far into the novel. I thought the writing was juvenile. The voice of Luke just... So I did not get on with this novel at all. And I had read a preview of the novel earlier this year, or last year, because I had thought of buying it. Shortly after it came out, I had thought of buying it from Book Depository, but I read a preview when it came out in the States, and the writing did put me off. And I'm not a fan of the writing. And I have to say the same is very true of Conventionally Yours by Annabeth Arnold. It's a story of two gamers, Conrad and Alden, who are sort of rivals, who end up taking a road trip together to a convention where they gradually fall in love. I thought the writing was fairly bad. I have to fan fiction level bad, and really sort of condescending. I mean, the characters are in their 20s. They're not teenagers. So, yeah, I mean, less on the condensation, people, please. So, I bailed on that one too. Yeah. Hopefully, this is not a sign of a very bad reading week, or reading month, or year. Anyway, so I still have, so what am I going to be reading this weekend and into the first proper week of 2021? I still have The Prettiest Star by Carter Sickels and American Pop by Snowden Wright in my book section of the e-library that I might have a go at. Also have a few books, physical books from my own library that I'm contemplating reading. First up is a reread of A Hero Born by Yong. This is the first book in the Legend of the Condor Hero series. The final volume of this particular quartet, A Heart Divided, comes out next month. And I have the idea of, for one of my 2021 reading projects, is to read the whole of the Legend of the Condor Hero series, one book a month, until I finish. This definitely is on my docket. And I also plan on reading all of Alan Hollinghurst in the first 6 months of 2021. And the first book would obviously be The Swimming Pool Library, which I read a few years ago and quite enjoyed. So I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to be reading this weekend. Next weekend I'm planning on reading Murder at the Vicarage. Because I'm also wanting to read all of the novels in this particular anthology from Agatha Christie over the course of the first 5 months of 2021. So, I know I'm going to be doing a buddy reading Murder at the Vicarage with Deborah Johnson. So, Deborah, if in the comments we can kind of work out how exactly we're going to check in with each other, whether it's going to be like on that particular weekly reads, in which I sort of talk about having finished Murder at the Vicarage, or maybe some kind of some questions or comments on the one where I'm saying I'm going to be reading it this weekend, and then however that's going to work. So anyway, BookTube, this video is going longer than I expected it to. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off for now. Obviously, I'm not going to be doing the tag I wanted to do today. I'll do that on Monday. And until then, have a great weekend. Thank you. Have a good evening as well as weekend. Hope your 2021 is off to a good start. And I will see you Monday. Thank you, BookTube, and stay safe.